For
But
sure.
also, like, if you do it with that level of a tax credit, you're looking at like 20% return on your, like, I'm talking like cash on cash return for the
that makes complete sense. I mean, a million equity and you're getting 50% of that to invest through tax credits. Yeah, that makes complete. It's like you're 20%. It's like you're getting percentage down on each of those investments and money to kind of do that rehab. So yeah, I mean, if you do the math right, it's definitely. Well, welcome back to another episode of Lessons into Blessings podcast. I am your host, Tari Thomas, and today we are going to be talking about expatriating to other countries to take advantage of real estate benefits and other benefits. Look, a lot of Americans are making the shift out of country to take advantage of not just better living in other countries, tropical weather, all those good stuff, but other income benefits and tax benefits. And we're sitting down with Travis West. He expatriated to Puerto Rico with his wife about 3 years ago, a little after COVID. And we're going to sit down and talk with him about why he made the shift to Puerto Rico, how he's doing real estate in the Puerto Rico area. So stay tuned for this episode. You do not want to miss it. And join with us to the show, Travis West.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. Puerto Rico is an adventure. Let's put it like that. Every week there's something new. So the subtext or the subtitle should be, life is never boring when you decide to leave the country. So
that's it. Well, we're gonna get into it. Benefits, challenges, and all of that good stuff, because it always sounds really sexy to live in another country, but we want to get into the nuts and the bolts on what it is that is the allure for people that are drawing people to different countries like Puerto Rico, Portugal, Spain. I keep hearing different places where people are going, and I'm like, man, what's the draw? Is there some tax advantages that I don't know about and all that good stuff? So we're going to start off with just what led you to Puerto Rico. What was that? If you take us a little before you made the shift, what kind of drew you to even the idea of making that move and making that shift?
Well, I mean, I got to step back and say Puerto Rico has this like liminal status where it's a U.S. territory and it's still part of the United States.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Still culturally, it's a totally different place.
Right.
And that liminal status affords it different legal opportunities to manage its tax regime and its system. So that plays a big factor into why we moved out here. So, if you can like rewind back to 2020, like right when COVID dropped, this is probably around April or May. We had spent about 2 months in the house already. And, it came on the news that, George Floyd was just like choked out, and for me as a black man, I've been to boarding school, I've been to college, I was in the middle of getting my master's, about to wrap that up, and working full time. And, we get conditioned to basically that experience, like, oh, this could happen to me. And I think because we want to be tough all the time, we kind of minimize that. But as it just kept playing over and over again on CNN, and I was stuck in the house watching that, I was like, yo, that can't be me. Because
right.
At that point in time, I had already been stopped by the police several times. And I'm a Boy Scout. I've never done anything. Like,
right.
And my track record was I participated at like all the student groups in high school and college. Like, not to say that, to my horn or anything, but like literally aimed to be like all American, everything that I did.
Yeah,
so
understood.
For me, I was like, wait a minute, I've actually had this experience. And what if I didn't get police officers that were relaxed, you know what I mean? Or you were easily threatened. And the scariest one for me is that this is so ironic. I was working as a paralegal at a law office that focused on federal criminal appellate law. So their whole thing was that they felt like the judicial system was too penal. So people were getting sentences that were just way too long. So it had like a civic component to it. I'm walking to that office, and on Ardmore Avenue, like maybe a half mile away, the bank got robbed. And apparently I fit the description of the robber. And so there was a shortcut from where I was living at the time. I was also a tutor at an academic program for high achieving high school males, Black males. This is where I lived. I lived in the program with the students. So mind you, I'm literally living the life of civic engagement, giving back to my community. And I'm walking from this tutoring program house where I lived to my law office job as a paralegal. And I take this shortcut, and the cops corner me into the shortcut, and they could pull up with SUVs, and their guns are out already. I didn't even say a word. And I'm like, nah. Like, I actually remember that scenario so crazy because I had my headphones in, and I told them that I couldn't hear anything that they were saying to me. And I yelled very loudly, "I cannot hear you. Can I reach for my headphones so I can remove it?" And I took it, and I just threw it on the ground. And so
I can imagine that was a scary thing because you don't know if a hand movement or anything is going to trigger a response.
Fortunately they were calm, but to me, I'm like, I've had enough scenarios in my life where this is the similarities were off the charts. Like, I personally was like, nah, this is my impetus. I'm leaving.
so this event kind of triggered you to say, okay, what are my options?
And I started looking heavily. So at the time, like I said, I was, in 2020, I was working at an affordable housing company that worked in predominantly Black neighborhoods. And I was part-time at Georgetown doing my master's in real estate. So I had taken this class about global real estate investment, how to set up a portfolio globally. Yeah. And one of the main issues, we had like 2 sections of this course that was about tax. And that's when it kind of hit me that, like, if I'm a US citizen, they tax me globally, and it doesn't matter, like, if I'm taking normal income, I'm going to get taxed globally, barring some certain thresholds. Yeah. So because they gave me exposure to that, and that was literally, again, I was taking this class at the same time that we were stuck in the house in COVID and George Floyd was on the screen, I knew that I wanted to move somewhere. I wanted to go somewhere where I could still have my capital work for me, because the way I see the world is that, you really have to have your own private resources in order to get through, to maximize your life and to get through any crises that happen. So I couldn't see myself going somewhere that would flatten or reduce my wealth creation. So we just started looking globally. My wife and I started looking at, we even started looking at Germany, Portugal, and the requirements were very difficult to navigate considering where we were in our journeys. Got it. Because we had a lot of money already tied up in our 401ks and stuff like that. And it wasn't easy to navigate how to invest passively abroad. So then, fast forward.
What were some of your requirements? Because just as you saying, you're considering, a couple of other different countries that were obviously outside of the U.S., but and not a U.S. territory. What were some of your requirements that you needed to be met?
Well, one, I was trying to figure out how could I utilize my career and all the knowledge I've been gaining in a way that wouldn't just be lost by going abroad. So the U.S. is a very specific real estate market. It has the largest investable market in the world, but for that reason, the career that I had built was very specific to the United States. Yeah. So I had a background in affordable housing and was doing my master's with a focus on development and finance. Well, where do they do affordable housing like we do in the United States? So if you go to the more developed European countries, they just have straight up subsidy that comes straight from the government, and they control rent so much that they don't have to produce affordable housing at the same clip that we do. And they also don't use private subsidiaries to the extent that we do to create affordable housing. So,
and when you talk about, just for those people who are not in the States, when you say private subsidies, you're talking about like the Section 8 and things like that to
so basically,
housing.
Exactly. The U.S. Takes an entrepreneurial approach towards it. They say, okay, we need to produce affordable housing. The government itself is not going to be in the business of doing this. We're going to incentivize entrepreneurs to create it and give them either a tax benefit or a very predictable coupon, which is basically what Section 8 is, that they can rely on to build their portfolio. And the rest of the world doesn't necessarily do it like that. And so if you look at all the jobs, I actually perused all the jobs that I could find in these different markets. And a lot of the real estate jobs were in private equity because that's how they were deploying private capital towards real estate. There was no basically private affordable housing portfolios.
Makes sense.
Because even the nonprofits, those are in the United States, those are private organizations that are run by a board of privately selected individuals. So they get all the money from a public place, the government. But so I was kind of stuck. I was like, okay, my passive investment plan and my actual daily career is gone if I move abroad. And so how do I figure this out? And then let's say I do figure out how to make good money. How do I get to keep it? Because I know, being on the side of real estate that I was on, like the tax code is just filled with all these. I almost feel like it's like a gotcha game. Like if you don't know about the things that you could take advantage of, you never take advantage of them, and you pay more tax.
Understood.
So I was like,
and just let me rewind. Like your passive investment strategy that you wanted to implement, what did that look like? And what do you think? Go ahead. It
was real estate focused, obviously, because that was my. I like to have control of the things that I put large sums of money in, and then also
partially passive, partially active, right?
Correct. So what I mean by that is like I was doing at the time we were focused on long-term rentals, and the idea was buy one unit, hold it, then possibly buy two. After you compound growth. After you buy two, you buy four. And which each level up, you would be able to accrue like all the deductions that you get with real estate. And I was also working on this at the time before we decided to move to Puerto Rico. I was working on this idea of becoming a full-time real estate professional, because then it would remove the passive limits. Because if you are a passive investor, you don't fully work in real estate 100% of the time. You can only claim $25,000 in deductions. And I was already working at a real estate company. All of my skills and background were in real estate.
For sure.
So the idea was to possibly buy a really a pretty large portfolio and then become 1099, because then it would remove the deduction caps.
Because as a real estate professional, you get to be able to now you write off some of the active income that you make with your passive income streams. So I mean, I get that. So that's definitely a benefit of becoming a real estate professional. For those that don't know, that they're spent over 20 hours of their time, there's a certain threshold you have to meet. So many hours of your time is dedicated to real estate space. So I just want to give people a background for those who didn't know.
And in particular with that rule, it's even pro rata based off the property. So in order to get the most benefit from it, you'd have to buy a pretty large property in order for it to meet like your active income needs.
Right.
So the idea was to like acquire like 3 or 4 smaller properties, leverage them all, sell them once there's enough equity, and buy a bigger one. And that's when I would try to convert like to be 1099. So Puerto Rico then actually took that whole idea and then put it on lighter fluid. Like it was like, oh wait, this is still part of the U.S., but it's not, and it's got its own like tax incentives.
Right.
And
so explain to folks what that is, right? So you now kind of discovered Puerto Rico. Hey, it's got certain advantages. What are those advantages that said, oh, okay, this is kind of the best of both worlds, right? So what was that?
Yeah, so I mean, and I think I understand why Puerto Rico is doing this. They had a pretty huge brain drain. Basically, since becoming a part of the United States in the middle of the 20th century, that opened up the doorway. Since every Puerto Rican resident was immediately a U.S. citizen, that opened up the doorway for a lot of people for them to repatriate to the United States. So as things became not as kosher as on the island as it could be in the States, right. I mean, granted, the States is a huge market. They had a lot of population come out. So because Puerto Rico has its own tax authority that controls its tax laws, and there's a line in the IRS code that says that, you know, Puerto Rican residents are not taxed by the United States, but they're taxed by Hacienda, which is the Puerto Rican tax authority.
Okay.
It gave them the ability to create these incentives to kind of slow down that brain drain of just people. Because if you look at it, basically the population the decline has happened since they became part of the United States.
Got it.
And they're losing pretty much people in every category you could think of to the U.S. So, you know, doctors, lawyers, architects, contractors, you name it.
Yeah.
And so to slow that down, they had to incentivize not just business, but business that is specifically productive. What they did was they created a suite of, they've done this multiple times in their history, but the most recent iteration of it is this suite of tax incentives that primarily go under this law called Act 60. Mm-hmm. It's pretty comprehensive. So it includes like manufacturing, research and development, tourism, consulting, export services. So basically, if you do anything in those spaces and others that I have not named, just because
it's large, we understand, yeah.
Read it. But basically, they are incentivizing all these these activities, so that they can get people to stay. And what comes with it is, okay, a lower tax rate, but also a push to do business in Puerto Rico,
right,
in a way that generates the more economics here. So the ones that I utilize, the ones called export services, which allows you. So if you're a Puerto Rico-based resident and you are doing any type of export service, so you're consulting, legal services outside of Puerto Rico, right? So the idea is to bring in capital to Puerto Rico through building a business.
Yeah.
You get a 4% corporate tax rate, 0% dividends tax rate, and then actually, depending on the volume of your business, it's a 2% corporate tax rate. And I think if you have an office, it's like a 50% deduction on your property taxes for that office. Wow. So that's just one,
Right. Now I'm wondering, can your home be considered your office?
Not here. They have too many people.
All right. Try to take advantage of that. Yeah. But even the corporate tax, I mean, that's a huge, I think US, it's about 20% corporate tax rate versus what, 4%?
Yep. So, And then, so if you're an individual, it's even greater arbitrage than that, right? Because the corporate tax rate is not the same thing as your personal. So the fact that they give you a 0% dividends tax rate. So what you could do is, and this is actually what I did, I set up a consulting company and I fired myself from my old job. And then anybody who wanted to work with me from my old job, like, because it was a nonprofit that had different companies that we worked with. Yeah. And I was like, well, if you liked any idea that came from me and I did anything that was good with you, would you want to do a contract with me? And it worked out. Like, at first I thought, and the reason is because it worked out is because I had such good relationships with the people who were, running the nonprofits and the businesses that worked in that space. Yeah. And so from their standpoint, they didn't really care if I was like W-2 or 1099.
It didn't matter.
And they were so used to using consultants to do any type of capacity building that they needed. That it was 6 half a dozen the other to them. So I want to sum up a little bit just what you're saying, because you are essentially a 1099 employee. You are in your own company. Yeah. Right. So it's your company. I'm assuming you hire yourself. So it's an S corp. So an LLC with taxes and S corp. Are you your own employee? Yeah. Okay. So you pay yourself, and the income tax that the income that you pay yourself is taxed at certain rate. Yeah. So that's based it's based off FICA and then what the normal income tax rate is. Okay. But then now any money that you keep in your business, I'm just trying to break it down for folks. The money that your business keeps and the income that your corporate, your LLC generates, that is taxed at the 4% instead of the 20% that the U.S. charges. Yeah, it's the same concept that S corps use all the time. So I pick a salary, and I say, and you have to do. It's basically called like transfer pricing. That's one word for it. But basically, you have to pick a salary that is commensurate with what you do. Understood. For the size company you have, So I picked a salary that was in line with that, and I paid myself that, and I paid FICA on top of it. Yeah. But then the rest of it was whatever was not a business deduction, and I actually had a lot of them because I had to travel a lot. So. And then like pay for hotels and stuff, which was a little bit unanticipated. But it still was like a far cry from like, okay, you were getting taxed at the 28% tax rate, and that's huge. I mean, that's a huge deal. So I think. That's a big benefit of saying, you know what, especially if you're a 1099, especially if you can do business anywhere, and being in Puerto Rico, and now, someone in the US is utilizing your services. Well, hey, guess what? Now those services, that's an import into Puerto Rico. And so you're an export company, which I think is brilliant, by the way. So that's pretty dope. So living in the U.S., living in Puerto Rico, what do you feel like are the benefits and the challenges? When we came on, you were talking about it's always interesting in Puerto Rico. I want to give people kind of the benefits and the advantages of being in Puerto Rico. Just from a living standpoint, we're going to talk about the real estate aspect of it here in a second. I think for me, obviously, it has to do with my own. Like some of it has to do with my own personal background. Like my family's from the islands, but I didn't grow up in the islands. So then like there's always some quotient that you got to allocate to it just being island life. For sure. There's certain like cultural differences there. And it works both ways. You get the positives of that, As a Black man, I don't walk around feeling like anything. Like I don't feel under threat. In fact, people just assume I'm privileged most of the time, which is nice. It's like it's totally flipped than what it is. Right. And then the challenges can be like, you have to take care with like having more infrastructure just for your own daily living. Like for instance, bought a property where I'm about to rent out part of it and live in the other, and I've been waiting on this on a wait list for a generator for like 4 months, wow. And then the 4 months passed, and I hadn't gotten a call or a follow up. And I went down to the vendor, and they were like, "Yeah, we fabricated your generator, but they got the sizing wrong, so we told them to send it back and do it again." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like you guys didn't check the sizing for my generator I've been waiting 4 months on?"
Right. So, I love it.
Yeah, and then it's just like, just the fact that there was also a lot of changes in the rules that you have to get used to. So like I basically became a walking reference book for the part of the US tax code that I needed to know. And so I feel like I'm constantly educating myself on how to best navigate Puerto Rico, because the rules don't just transplant just because it's a US territory. Yeah. So doing business has become a little bit more challenging in that respect. And then also, I don't want to come off as too critical, but it does feel like, I feel like most Puerto Ricans would actually agree with me in this respect though, but it does feel like you have to know people to get stuff done. Like basic things that would just be like a utility in the United States, it's not here. You got to have a homie who does that, and like you got to show up at their, baby showers and all that in order for it to still be like that.
Right. Well, here's the beauty of that though. So, and this is the first country you've lived in abroad. I did my MBA. I got an international MBA. So had to really study how to do business in other countries. And the US is the only country that does business like they do, right? Like if you go anywhere else in most countries, and let's wipe out Europe for a second, right? But in general, relationships is how you get business done, right? And so it's interesting that you bring that part up, because I think that's where the US probably has the most challenges, going overseas and thinking, oh, everyone does it like the US, and they don't. I mean, right?
Things that I didn't know you need to have relationships for. It's like you got to have a guy for everything. Yeah. It's not like, and I found myself to be a pretty competent project manager in the States, because, if you're working on something, you don't expect every single vendor to be AWOL. You got your good actors, and then in this one, it's like you could be doing the biggest transaction with them. You got to follow up with them on everything. Yeah. And it's just like, do you want to make money? Right. Right. So that's what
I don't know. The US could probably give that a run for the money. I feel like I still have to manage a lot, because people, once they get comfortable, they start slipping. So I think
I worked in Baltimore before this. I didn't think it could get worse. I was like, I thought that it was like I was already
right. This is you were like, oh, it's another level of management.
I've gotten to the point where I might just like build a chat bot. It's like, text this person, call this person to help me, because it's just like the amount of touches that you have to give every single aspect of the system for
That's good, though. That's good. Like, well, you're mastering it, and I think that's the key. Is whatever space we're in, there's nuances in that space, and you're getting a level of mastery from being there. Means 3 years. And it's probably less time than that in the kind of like really getting in the gut of it. So you're developing a level of mastery for that space, and I think that gives you a competitive advantage over the people who are just kind of moonlighting the area. They're saying, oh, this is a great space, but they're not really in it day to day and really understanding kind of the nuances of that space. So I think for everyone, I'm big on riches are in the niches. And I think because you're in that space and you're living there, and you're building the relationships. And I was going to ask the question of, what do you think are some of the biggest skills you need to do business in Puerto Rico and do real estate in Puerto Rico? But you're getting it, right? Like, you're establishing that. And so that's going to make you a serious threat when you really start like building traction, right? Which it sounds like you're already in the midst of. So
yeah, I mean, so that question, maybe it's the way my mind works. And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor in my previous workplace that really put me down onto this concept. But and I see how they blend together. So I'll just say two things. Just being open culturally, like understanding that you just got here. So if things are in a certain way, you can't just respond to them with negativity or positivity. You have to keep observing. And this concept of like, when in Rome, you have to understand when to use it and when to challenge it.
For sure.
And that in and of itself is a big part of the skill set. But bringing up what my previous mentor offered me, relationship capital. If I didn't have that idea coming down here, I don't think we would have moved as fast or been as successful as.
No, I love that. I think, so what I heard you say was cultural intelligence, right? There is an adapting that has to happen. And I've worked with a lot of global markets. And so I know how different countries move, and you have to understand the culture because it's very important in how you approach and how you have to pick up on cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, and knowing really how to build relationships with that particular demographic, right? Because, based upon how people are raised or how the country runs is going to shift and transform how you build relationships. It may look different than the way business relationships look within the US. So I think that's definitely a big game changer, and being able to do that. Not everyone's willing to probably have I think you called it openness, but you have to be flexible, right? Like, being in other countries and doing things which may seem backwards to an American, you have to be able to be flexible, to be able to be nimble enough to navigate kind of the way they run business within the country.
Yeah, and then also looking at it like an opportunity. So like, I've been down here a while, so I've seen other people start and fail or start and, get fed up with, the environment. So they just, move on to other things. What I see is that if I see something that could be a process improvement and there's a cultural reason stopping it, I go, cool. If I can do it for my business, I just gained a competitive advantage over everybody else.
Right, exactly.
And then I also, I don't assign anything, right? I don't say, oh, Puerto Rico is so backwards this. No, I don't do that. I go, there's probably a reason for why they show up in this specific way. And I'm trying to be an asset to not just, building my business, but also the community at large. So
absolutely.
One example of this is that we're trying to do a little bit of community development with our real estate development because I think you can kill two birds with the same stone, and then also ultimately get a better outcome.
Yeah.
So in the areas that we do invest in with real estate, we tend to get to know everybody in the area.
Yeah.
And we have a project coming up where we could potentially do like a community charrette, and then make sure that it has a component to it that the neighbors agree with. Right. And that's big down here because community policing is very strong here. Like, if you can't really like operate in a way where you're not going to hear it from your neighbors. Right. And if you don't hear it from your neighbors, then they don't like you. Like, honestly, you're not hearing this.
I love that.
Your neighbors. And so for me, just looking at it like that. Okay, this is an opportunity for me. And then also, how can I add value for Puerto Rico and my community here in Puerto Rico? Instead of just being like, oh, like there's this opportunity, so I'm just trying to extract. Like, if you read the code how it's written, it's the exact opposite of extraction. You got to use Puerto Rican vendors, and you're not allowed to excuse that requirement unless you have a financial constraint that's significant. You got to use locally sourced stuff. So you got to really, get into the weeds and network pretty hard to make sure that you're getting, you're finding the right people for your business. And
it's win-win, right? Like the purpose of the government giving the tax advantages is to ensure that their business and the country thrives, and that not only jobs, same thing that we do from a U.S. standpoint, that people are getting access to jobs, it's improving the community and all of those good things. We haven't really talked to, and I wanted to jump to this space on the real estate side and the advantages. You're kind of tapping on it a little bit, but why would someone now, we talked about just living in Puerto Rico and the benefits from the corporate tax rate and dividend taxes, things like that. But now doing real estate in Puerto Rico, what are the advantages there? Why would an investor want to do business in real estate? In Puerto Rico?
That's a great question. Actually, at first I thought Puerto Rico was going to be like, I was going to probably be here for a while, like a good time, but not a long time. But as time went on and I started to get like really good roots here, started to grow those tendrils, if you will. And then I started to also see the full breadth of all the real estate incentives. I was like, I think I could die here. I think that's what's going to happen. I was like, I think I see the plot of land where my grave is going to be.
Right.
So, just to dive into that, we want to start utilizing all the incentives, but the one that we're focused on right now is the hospitality one. So how that works is that if you have an eligible hospitality project that has to create jobs, you have to use local vendors, you have to use local financial institutions. So having a depositing account where at least 10% of the company's revenue is deposited there.
Okay.
You also find a property that's correctly zoned to do the activity and has the right parking, because parking is a big issue here. They will give you a tax credit to make a large investment on a project. So, but it'd be your entire basis for the project. So, just
give us an example of what that looks like.
That's exactly where I was going. So if you got $1 million project, right? You can get up to a 40% tax credit on your project.
Wow.
And so that would end up being $400,000.
Yeah.
So that tax credit, you can sell it as a non-taxable grant to someone who needs tax abatement. And there's other actors here in Puerto Rico that look to buy this. So there's like lawyers, doctors, hospitals, big institutions that have large tax bills that will buy the tax credit on 95 cents on the dollar. And
I love that.
I won't say that it's simple, but it's a straightforward process. As in, if you do all your accounting, you capture all your receipts, you get a certification that comes from, it's called DDEC, the Department of Economic, and I don't know what the C stands for. I'm just
it's okay.
But they give you the audit approval, and then it shows up in your tax portal from the local tax authority. Yeah. And you can literally just assign it to someone, assuming that they pay you. So you can do it individually if you want to go find these people, but there's a tax exchange that was created that we're going to work with for our first tax credit project, and they only take a 1% fee.
Got it. So there's almost like a stock, like a E-Trade, for example, where you use your tax credits, and people are bidding on, how much they want to be able to purchase from that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's like what's cool about it, because my wife, she works part-time in our business, but she still has a W-2 job. We're going to just buy the tax credit to cancel out her taxes and then keep our money and then sell the rest of it. Right. Yeah, it's actually, when you think about how powerful it is, because then you don't even have to worry about the exchange rate. It's 1-to-1. I have the tax liability of $35,000. I'm just going to transfer all of that over here.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So
I see why you found your plot.
I said it. I'm going to be big right here. I'm not going nowhere.
That's for me, my wife, and the kids.
My sister's talking about moving down or whatever, so it's just like, but I think this is exactly what they wanted to create, right? Like,
yep, absolutely.
They wanted folks to feel like they could build something here.
Yep. And I feel like those people who are, because you hear some of these places, even Costa Rica as an example, right? Very favorable to Americans to move there. Those people that get in early, right, and really understand the landscape and how to take advantage of it, you somewhat become a student of that space, right? So I compare that even to the U.S. markets where people, it's obviously different because you there's certain tax advantages that you can't find in the U.S. But really just being a student of that space, like I can imagine that there's people that are living there that they heard about the advantages, but they're still not taking full advantage of it.
Well, that is actually, you touch on a subject that I find to be kind of sad, because there is one challenge that I actually forgot to mention, is that there is, to some extent, some negative public perception around the incentives, because there's a sense that Puerto Rico is for sale, especially from like lower income communities that may not have the skill set or the immediate access to take advantage of the incentives.
For sure.
Anytime you have a program that seems like it could be attached to a specific type of identity, it's gonna get pushback like that.
For sure. Understood.
Even
how do you deal with that? Just in general, because obviously, like you said, there's certain people who frown upon, let's take the Olympics, for example, when it was in the Paris, Parisians were like, oh my gosh, now you guys want to clean up the place and make it pretty for everybody to come here, right? I see it similar to that. Like, okay, you're offering all these benefits to people that are not citizens. What about us, right? And so how do you, I think you go ahead. Yeah, I think just your community elements that you try to bring in on your projects, I think that is a critical element to create that piece within the community as well, right? So
yeah, that's definitely a part of it. I think that kind of stems out of my background. Like, yeah, I'm a Black person from disadvantaged communities that have been iced out. So
so you understand kind of the perspective that they're coming from a little bit.
And I think that's largely is the empathy that I come with. Why, even though I disagree, and I disagree primarily because if I put myself in the position of the Puerto Rican government, what else would you do? You have this like massive competitor that's stealing all your people. That's basically what's happening. Right. And it seems like it's not a competitor because you're a part of it, but just how any state has to compete for the people that live there.
For sure.
And it's more detrimental when you don't have like a tri-state area, right? Like, if I wanted to work in Baltimore but I lived in DC, I could just get on a train.
Right.
There's no ferry to Miami that's functional, that's cheap enough and affordable enough to make you a supercommuter. Right. So I understand both sides of it, and because I can have that empathy, I just try to toe the line and actually be honest to what the tax credit is supposed to do. Like, I am creating jobs. Like, I am investing in the community. So I know as an actor, I'm not the most
You're not
problematic.
abusing the system. You're using the system for what it was created for.
Correct. And I'm also taking on risk, so I have to be compensated for that risk.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, everybody's feelings is not going to help me avoid bankruptcy or feed my family.
That part right there.
So
understood.
And the government takes its tax either way. You can't feed your family. That's bad.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. 25%.
That's good though. That's good. So I love that we talked about the emotional intelligence, the cultural intelligence, the relationship, empathy, all skills that I think that create, like you said, a competitive advantage for yourself specifically. And your mindset of just being open and understanding and saying, hey, how can I be an asset to this community? How can this be a win-win for a community? I think that's critically important. A lot of people think when there are, advantages like this, it's kind of it's a take. Someone's got to lose in order for you to win, and it's not that situation.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of people think that it ends up being a zero-sum game. And look, I'm not saying that all of the actors out there are
I'm not specifically saying that too. There's always going to be bad actors in any market. There's always going to be people who take advantage to the next level degree. So yeah, we're not specifically talking about that. But I wanted to just kind of explain that out and kind of pull out what I heard you saying from the tax advantage standpoint. Now, you live in Puerto Rico, but you rent. So why not own a home versus rent? So what's the draw to that? Because in the U.S., you would think, okay, I want to own before I rent. I don't want to give my money to someone else. What are your thoughts between kind of renting versus
I'm actually about to change that. And it's only because for the first time ever, the math is the same. And so basically, I always just looked at it like an equation, and every time I did the math on a unit that I owned or created, I could charge more for it than I would want to charge myself.
Right.
So I used to joke and say, like, I always gentrify myself because I'm fine with living in the outskirts of somewhere.
Right.
Like,
yeah, understood.
Pretty, I'm not picky when it comes to that stuff. So, but recently we did decide to move into a property that we own, because the unit that we own, like the math on whether or not we paid rent to somewhere else or whether or not we lived in one of our units was the same.
Yeah.
It was literally the exact same.
Good.
And I was like, oh my God.
You're like, the math finally maths.
yeah. And so now I'm just going to charge myself rent. And then, now I'm
understood.
Cool
Understood. That makes sense. So you're yeah, that makes sense. Now, I researched kind of what the average home in Puerto Rico looks like for those interested. It seemed in the San Juan area, the average was roughly around $370 for the average home. And the rents for a 2-bedroom were roughly like $1,900 to $2,000 a month. Is that roughly, would you say that's roughly?
I was talking to my sister about this because, she's generally thinking about moving down. And the issue that I'm seeing here is that, and this is part of in the equation of why we're about to move, is that there is a kind of silent inflation in the housing market down here. Okay, if you go to the Midwest and you say, all right, I want to pay between $1,200 and $1,900 for a 2-bedroom.
Yeah.
Just look at the unit quality that you will get. It's a lot better than here. And so it's that is the average, but the issue is that I think it has to do with the population loss. Basically, the population loss has made it so there's less people taking care of their properties. So the cost of capital to reinvest in those properties is leaving with those is increasing because it's going up as those people leave. So what I mean by it is that if if someone leaves and they don't pass their property to an inheritor in a clean way, there's this huge inheritance problem that makes it so that it's not easy to put reinvestment dollars back into that property. So if that person didn't create a plan to take care of the property as time has gone on, once it hits that inheritance problem, it's like never going to get invested in again.
Okay.
And so even though the population is declining, I think that the rate at which the usable housing cost is declining is actually faster than the population is declining. So the landlords it's like a landlord friendly environment, because you don't really have to fix nothing and you can get like pretty good rents.
From that standpoint, okay. Yeah, because no one's upkeeping, so no one's really rehabbing. And so therefore the comparable property, so if you were to look at like after repair value, there's no real repair that's needed. It's kind of, well, the comparable properties on the market are in the greatest condition, so hey, this is going to be just as good. Okay, got it.
But if you have location matters a lot here, like in real estate, but like let's say you have a property that's in a good area, then it validates like really fixing up a property. You now can charge like 3 times the average because it's actually not, so like.
Because it's not average, right? Yeah. It's fixed up in a nice area, then it's not average.
Yeah. So then the middle of the market is like bottoming out. And so it's just like top end, middle is vanishing, and then there's a lot of this bad housing stock. Puerto Rico also created incentives for long-term rentals though too, to kind of stop that. But the issue is, again, as people are exiting, they're taking their capital with them, or their potential to invest with them. So even if investors are bullish, it ends up kind of being kind of circular, because if you got someone who's willing to be a manager in Puerto Rico and willing to create a functional portfolio, they have to turn around and explain to the investment community how they're going to be successful. And so, even though I know this from living here, I'd have to explain to someone like, yo, you actually can make like $3,000 on a rental if you know what you're doing on a long-term rental. And they'd be like, in Puerto Rico? Psh. And so because that person doesn't believe you, it's just that much harder to even raise capital if you wanted to like do that investment.
Got it. And that's what I'm going to ask you next is, if there's the population is leaving, what is driving the demand of rent?
It's still demand, because the number of people leaving has slowed, so the rate of change has gotten smaller.
Okay.
But the deterioration of the properties has been a problem for like 40 years.
Okay.
So now they can hit their maximal cycle where they need to be reinvested in.
Yeah.
Can't even rent them anymore.
Okay.
And so then it's causing a greater demand for long-term rentals.
Got it.
That's what I see happening.
Because people are demanding higher quality of living than what right? Yeah. So like you said, after about 20 to 30 years within a U.S. home, you're going to have to start reinvesting for all the things to bring it back up to a livable condition, or to rehab stuff to make it a place where people really actually want to live, right? So it sounds like people have exhausted that window and that timeline, and now is a time period where money needs to be cycled back in to be able to rehab these dilapidated properties, or properties that have a loss of care. So
in America, Puerto Rico is part of America, it's still a privatized system, so it has to follow private actors being like, oh, I want to develop this here. That's basically, and so you're seeing small scale development at the highest end, but luxury and high upper housing always gets built. Right. So when you're talking about a solution for most of the country, I mean, like even the current U.S. housing stock, most of it was created like post World War II. So that's why it's the same problem that's happening in the United States. It's just because it's an island, it's happening in a more exacerbated way, and the fact that they still have the brain drain from the U.S. So between the two things, it's like creating this so high demand areas in counties and cities where they're pretty high demand, the housing value goes up pretty rapidly. Yeah. And then there's the fact that you can it's a coastal market, so people are also wanting to look at these properties as short-term rentals too. So it's like, I can imagine. Yeah, the competition gets to be pretty stark, actually.
Got it. So if you had to choose and pick, what is the greatest opportunity, specifically within San Juan, because that's the capital, that's probably where you are, what is the greatest opportunity or submarket or asset class, or what do you think is the greatest opportunity from a real estate standpoint, investment standpoint, within the Puerto Rico area, with all of the things that are going on, the brain drain, the need for capital to kind of reinvest in some of these dilapidated properties? What do you feel like is the biggest thing that's storming right now that people could take advantage of if they really wanted to invest in Puerto Rico? That might be a tough one, but
well, maybe this is just a part of me that just like loves real estate, but like, and also understands that you build different portfolios for different reasons.
For sure, absolutely.
If somebody was really thinking about it the right way, I don't think you could go wrong. Like you could go long term, you can go like mixed use projects, you can just do short term rentals. It's just about, because you didn't ask, at what band, like income band are you trying to achieve this at, right? So my mind immediately went to like at scale, because that's what I worked at.
For sure, absolutely.
But yeah, if you wanted to do like affordable housing at scale and you wanted to build a private portfolio that did that, I would do it here too, because it's just like they've created tax credits for that. Like there's this area specifically in this city called it was actually really popular, but it's like a submarket in San Juan called Rio Pedras. So if you do an investment over $1 million, and then you need to have equity over $1 million.
For sure.
But if you have that, you get like a 50% tax credit on your basis.
Wow.
So it's like, if I live here, and it comes with all the things I talked about before, 4% corporate tax, 0% dividend. If I lived here and I was like, okay, I want to die here, and I had $1 million, and I wanted to make sure I had like basically like a 20% return on investment every year. Yeah. If I had the capital at scale, I would just go buy a bunch of stuff in Rio Pedras and just flip it. And rent it out. Because the competition, I went to, just on an individual level, for our company, I went to look at a commercial property, and they tried to claim it had like 30 units or something like that. This is what these people did. They carved out all the hallways and made it like dorms. So there was no common area. You egress to your room, which you rented, and the room was like a studio. And this is not a concept that I'm saying we should copy. Right. I'm saying that it was substandard living that was done like extremely creatively. And I'm like, someone could come in and do like affordable housing units at scale. It's a win-win again. It's like, if I set up housing for an entire region, I feel good because all these people got housing. For sure. But also, like, if you do it with that low of a tax credit, you're looking at like 20% return on your, like, I'm talking like cash on cash return for the
that makes complete sense. I mean, a million equity, and you're getting 50% of that to invest through tax credits. Yeah, that makes complete. It's like your 20%. it's like you're getting percentage down on each of those investments and money to kind of do that rehab. So yeah, I mean, if you do the math right, it's definitely has its advantages.
You can get a 40% loan from the government, and then or not from the government, from a bank, and then you're responsible for 10% of it.
Yeah,
and it's only possible because they're really trying to. They want to create amenities for the people that live here,
for sure.
Right? It's just that the problem. I think what happens when people have animosity towards the rules is that when you hear that the requirement is $1 million, you're like, well, only a private equity company could do that. But it's like most of the things in America get done with large scale capital. It's not like
exactly.
We don't we didn't even most of the housing stock that was built was not even built by the small entrepreneurial setup that we have now that builds a lot of the housing stock now. That's not how it was built. And that's why it can't keep up with the demand. It was like Sears Roebuck printing homes because they had a deal with the government on
understood
land, and they were making a ton of homes at once. That's how, I forgot the name of the community in Philadelphia, but in North Philadelphia, a whole community got built by this developer in the 40s that way. And he did 500 homes at once. They all look the same.
Yeah. No, understood. I mean, that's a lot of master plan communities when you think about it across the U.S., especially once you start getting over on the West Coast where it's really cookie cutter. So
rinse and repeat. And
Well, brother, this wouldn't be Lessons into Blessings if we didn't end the show in just talking about what's your biggest lesson or hurdle that you've had to overcome, and how is it still benefiting you today? And we're going to focus, this is a Puerto Rico edition of this show. What's the biggest hurdle or lesson you've had to learn in Puerto Rico doing real estate that you believe now that you've learned it will continue to serve you?
That's a good one. I'm trying to choose. It's because you made me choose.
You can drop a couple of them if it makes sense.
Okay, so the first one. You ever seen Kill Bill? I'm gonna make a Kill Bill reference.
I remember pieces of it.
Wiggle your big toe when she's trying to recover from being paralyzed.
Just go tell the story.
Yeah, so basically, I tell myself that sometimes there's so much information acquisition that you need to do, and you have to do that while running projects.
Right.
That it can be somewhat overwhelming, but then I tried to boil it down to, it was the same lesson that she had in the movie. It's I just reiterate the same phrase. You should watch the clip. Yeah. But basically, she's plotting this whole revenge thing, and she's still paralyzed. And in her mind, she's really got this whole fantasy, but she's I can't do anything until I actually move my big toe first.
Right.
And so the idea is she willed herself into being able to move her body after being paralyzed.
So you can dream up, you can learn all the things you can learn, but until you start taking action, ain't nothing getting done.
Yeah, and it's also a lot of times it's the most immediate thing in front of you, right? Yeah. You're you got big models, you can have 15 tab pro formas. Sometimes
right.
And it's cool, but sometimes you got to boil it down to that one process that you got to work on, and you got to build off that until you can keep growing. Especially because for me, my work, I worked backwards into this. I got a career, or did that for 8 years, 9 years, worked my way up, this ladder of an affordable housing portfolio. Ended up with, for 2 years, they called me the COO. I didn't want to be that, but that's what they wanted to call me. And, I was looking at pretty big numbers. And now I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with much smaller numbers, but it's much more important for me and for my career growth and where, I want to take this for the company and everyone who relies on it.
For sure.
So, and then getting into the second one, I actually just learned this from, I don't know if he knows he's my mentor yet, but this guy I met out here who's real cool. CPA background, has worked in international businesses all across the world.
For sure.
And we were talking about this, and he was like, and he was talking about this specific subject, starting big and then working on your own thing. He was like, I used to work at these companies where the rounding error was $1 million. If something was $1 million, you didn't know if it actually meant if it was $500,000, $750,000, or actually $1 million because they just rounded.
Right.
And he said he finally got his business where he's rounding in the thousands, and he almost teared because he can round in the thousands and not worry about it. And I was just like, nah, that is amazing, because it's a testament to consistency, right? Like, if you keep what's in front of you and you keep it going like the way you're supposed to, you will get to being able to round in the thousands.
Right, right. Yeah. That's beautiful. Good stuff, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, dropping your knowledge on just living in Puerto Rico and doing business in Puerto Rico. You're in the trenches, and I know there's a lot more stuff that you're in the midst of rolling out. How can people get in touch with you if they want to touch base?
So we
outside of flying to Puerto Rico,
Yeah, you're always welcome to do that. So you can look us up on Instagram. We got the Couple of Investments handle. It's also the same thing on YouTube as well. Okay. And we have our website, axiosventures.co. And so, we drop gems on there. We got a blog going. And then we also post our YouTube videos on there. And we are setting up a private newsletter so that, when we're working on deals and stuff, folks who opt in are welcome to at least see what we're working on. And
Good stuff. Well, man, thank you again for joining the show. And for those that tuned in, until next time, stay blessed.
Thanks for having me.